Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News America. Today is Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025. We're going to be looking at the 2025 United States elections, specifically the ones that are taking place on November 4th, 2025. All of these including the gubernatorial elections, the election in New York City, and then we will very briefly look at the House election that is happening on November 4th. Election Time News, your one stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. Also, make sure to follow the Substack, Threads, Instagram, and X. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. So, what we're looking at here to start things off is the overall elections that are happening at this this November. And so what we have first off is Texas 18th. This was after Sylvester Turner passed away in March, and now we do have a special election on November 4th. And I do believe at this point it's not going to be this is not going to be with the new map that is going to take effect later. So this will be a safe Democratic seat that is going to be in the very small area in Harris County. As you can see over here, it's highlighted in gray. That's a gerrymandered blue safe county. Now, of course, the map is going to change a bit, but that is the one election that's really happening on the 4th. That is in the House. The other ones are happening. We actually have a week from today. Jerry Connolly's seat is up, who was originally the head of I believe, the Oversight Committee. And so that's going to be just a week from today. And then 2 weeks after that, we have the election where Grijalva, who won the somewhat competitive primary election there, is likely going to win and take her father's old seat after he passed away in March. So that was also the month that Sylvester Turner passed away in. So that's going to be the main outlook. By November 4th, we're going to have most likely every single seat filled again. So that's essentially all that's going to happen in the House. But in the governorships, we of course have two governorships here in New Jersey and in Virginia. These two states are both just on 4-year cycles, nothing special like Vermont and New Hampshire are. They're on 2. Other than that, every single other state's on 4. And the reason that California's here was because this was a recall election that Newsom beat by 23.7 points. So with that, then we do have a bit left to look at. Is just going to be New York City. So this is potentially might have up to 1.1 million people turning out. That's one unit for every 1,000, and that's going to roughly be able to estimate the percentages in each borough for the estimation. And of course, whoever ends up getting the majority would end up winning the entire election. So also what we need to do is win somehow. They would need to win 82% of the vote in Queens County and then all the vote in Kings County, and they would be able to win outright. But that's generally not going to happen, and that's not what we're looking at. Anyways, we have the 4 main candidates for the most part. It's going to be what we're looking at, and then we have closer focus in all of them for New Jersey, Virginia, and New York City. So to start things off, let's look at what we have so far for the nationwide information. We have Trump's approval rating, which is continuing to drop, but it actually has definitely stagnated in dropping. And so that's going to definitely potentially help the Republicans later. He's still at minus 14, which is a little bit less than he was at his previous term, his first term. But the end of the at the end of the current poll, the most recent poll, he was at minus 14. So he started to climb up again. But there's potential that he will continue to start dropping again, or it might end up actually start to stagnate. And I don't think that he's going to recover, as I don't really think he did at any point during his first term. And Biden didn't recover either. And right around this time, 4 years ago, Biden went underwater in his approval rating. He was at minus 1 right now. So that's going to be the number one important issue. For the approval rating, he's basically has a disapproval rating in every single state, including something he won minus a few, and he is just barely holding on in South Dakota and in Utah. But amongst 2024 voters, he's doing much better. He is ahead. But he is only above in every single state that he won all 3 times, except for North Carolina. So that is somewhat concerning for the Republican Party, as he's actually has a disapproval rating in every single state, especially in some strong states like Wisconsin, where he's down by 10.5, and 9.3 in Michigan, almost 5 in Pennsylvania. So some of these competitive states, 6.8, 6.9 in North Carolina and Georgia, respectively. But over here, you can see these right trending states, Arizona and Nevada, quite a bit higher and just barely above water in Ohio. It's gotten pretty close at some points, but then did go back around, but overall minus 6.5 in total. So even deep red states, he does have a disapproval rating right now, but that is really the concern there for the Republicans at this point in time is his disapproval rating. He did go back above 0 with general white voters, but other than that, he is still down below it, under 0, even with every single other demographic. So what we're looking at now is the most important issues, and then the economy is still number one, but civil rights has actually been climbing quite a bit. It's all the way up to 15 points, and now economy has actually dropped a bit. And that actually is still quite a bit of a concern for the Republicans, as now you have economy and civil rights being the number one and number two issues. But if we look at how he's doing with these issues, jobs in the economy, he's down by almost 15. Immigration, he's down to minus 8. And civil rights, he's at about minus 15 as well. So all three of those main ones being, of course, being the economy, civil rights, and then immigration is on the way up. And you also look at healthcare. He is actually underwater there, but it's not shown there. So all of those are essentially at critical points for his administration. So that may end up affecting things a bit, especially when we're looking at things that are happening in just 2 short months. So next we're going to be looking into is specifically these governorship elections. This is actually, we're going to start with the New York City election first, just to get the one single election out of the way. So what we're looking at now is just the 5 boroughs of New York City, and we have the Democratic nominee Zoran Mamdani, we have Republican nominee Sliwa, we have Andrew Cuomo, and we have Eric Adams. So all these three are or were Democrats, and now we also have a Republican. All 4 of them are running for mayor. Zoran Mamdani basically shocked the entire political world when he won the first round of the Democratic primary in late July. So he got 43.8% of the vote. You can see there's a few odd people down here, but that's really going to be the main thing. But then he won the second round, the final round, by quite a bit. He won that by almost 13 points. He won the first round by about 7, which means that he did get most of the vote from Brad Lander and from Adams. Lander and Mamdani did cross-endorse each other, so that definitely must have helped things. But you can see there he did reach over 570,000 votes. And so then Cuomo did decide to run as an independent, and he is the main second place contender right now in the mayoral race. You can see he actually managed to win in Manhattan for the first round by 5 points. He did relatively well in the Bronx, and he cleanly won Brooklyn and Queens. He did, of course, lose Staten Island, but only by 8 percentage points. So that was going to be another large win there, honestly, for how things go. As far as Staten Island, it's definitely a much more Republican leaning area. And there's obviously not many Democrats. As you can see, there's only about 25,000 votes or so. Looking at the odds on Kalshi, basically Zoran Mamdani is almost completely front running right now. He's at 83%. Andrew Cuomo is second at 12, and then it's 3 and 2 for Adams and Sliwa. So that's definitely basically just taking it away entirely, since he hasn't really gone below 80% except for a very, very brief period in very early August. But other than that, he has been consistently above 80%. He's actually been very, very slowly increasing, and so, not by much though, but he has been slowly increasing. Cuomo has been slowly going up, and mostly at Adams' expense as of right now. And almost $20 million have been bet in this market. So that's going to be relatively accurate as far as how many people's opinions are getting put in there. Look at Politico. This is the last election, somewhat for turnout purposes. You ended up having just over 1 million. That's about 1.08 million votes. So that's going to be basically where this 1100 number comes from, roughly rounded there. And so the main focus here, looking at the size of the victories, you ended up with about 100,000 votes on Staten Island. You had 200, 300K Kings, and then the largest hauls are from Queens and New York, where you actually, no, all three of these are pretty relatively equal. And then you had Bronx, which was about another 125,000. So you can look specifically at the overall vote. You had 125,000 in the Bronx, then 275,000, 275,000, 325,000 in Kings County expected here. So that's going to be the largest haul, but it's also where Mamdani did very well in Brooklyn. He won it by 18. So that was the largest and that's also where he got his largest margin. So that's definitely going to help him, and especially against Cuomo, who is the second in the lead here, as you can see in the RCP polls. You have Mamdani with 38.2%, ahead by 15 points. You can see second place, obviously, is Cuomo, 23.2. Slee was actually third at 16.6. Adams is all the way down at about 10.5 points. He is running as an independent, but he is actually the incumbent. And so we have here is a very poor performance so far. 38.2 DDHQ has him up at 39.2%. But then Cuomo at 25, they have him only at 23. Sliwa at 15, they have him at 16. Adams at 10.6, which is actually perfectly even. And then Walden, who is another independent who's running there, at 1.4%. So it's actually a little bit of a drop for Mamdani, 37% in this most recent one by American Pulse. So that's going to be the main thing to watch, though. He's starting to have a somewhat considerable lead now, and it's starting to consistently grow at this point. So that's going to be the number one thing to watch, is going to be how that ends up turning out. So what we have here is going to be most likely a large win in Kings County. So this is just going to be the first round, because not 100% sure, but if Mamdani does end up winning the first round, it's essentially going to be over, because Sliwa's voters, as we saw, he actually is winning more conservatives than Cuomo and Adams. So when Sliwa, if he does actually end up being the lowest candidate, which it's potentially he's not, Adams might be. By the way, most of those voters are actually going to be voting for Mamdani. So with that, you can see that it is in fact actually a dire situation for Cuomo and Adams. They're going to have to flip that around in order to potentially beat Mamdani. They're going to need more support for whoever ends up being last place. So essentially, what we're looking at is what we were looking at in the primary. If he did win round one, or if he actually, he didn't even need to win the first round as long as Brad Lander had enough transfer votes. But the fact that he did win the first round meant that he essentially did perfectly win just because he was going to get more of the votes from Brad Lander, Adams, Stringer, and everyone else. So looking at again here is going to be the number one pickoff is going to be Kings County. This is a large county. In 2021, Adams won 240,000 votes out of this county. If Mamdani can even get somewhere near that, 240,000, that's a great spot to start. That is 73. That would be 73.85% of the expected turnout on the night. So that would be a bit actually a bit more than we had here just because of how we rounded there. So that would be a bit of a drop there. That'd be considerable size, though, for Mamdani, considerable lead there. Then probably going to have a bit less, though. If you look at the overall polling, you can see he only has 38.2. It's a lot of undecideds. So that's really going to be the main issue, is going to be trying to decipher these undecideds. You can see 38. That's going to be 30 to 26. Then you end up getting another 25 or so. That's going to be about 50. That's going to be close to 80. So about only 8% undecided, actually. So it's not going to be that bad. But with that few undecided still, you end up having to have, you're going to have probably a bit more of a strength from Mamdani in Kings County, especially a bit less in places like Manhattan, or especially not in the Bronx. Sliwa might actually end up coming out on top in Richmond County, which is Staten Island. It's a very Republican area. That's the one county that he won against Adams, even though Adams actually won with over 2/3 of the vote in 2021. So that's almost certainly going to go red, even if uh, things go relatively moderately okay. Cuomo is going to do relatively okay. Adams is going to probably only get a few percentage of the vote there. Mamdani, Sliwa's not going to perform that well. Cuomo's probably going to get around 14%. You get around 14%. Cuomo's probably going to not do very well in these areas because this is going to be conservative voters who Mamdani has actually proven that he's going very well with. So that would be a safe county for Sliwa there. So that would be 52,000 votes for Sliwa. Now we're at 270,000 for Mamdani. If we're looking more at the Bronx, which is going to be another slightly difficult one for them, obviously Adams did very well in the Bronx, but you can see that Mamdani didn't. That's actually one that Cuomo won. So this is going to be a bit of a difficulty for him. Cuomo and Mamdani are probably going to be running about even in this county, if not Cuomo actually winning more, and then Sliwa potentially being able to get somewhat close. Adams is probably going to do relatively poorly, though. Cuomo and Mamdani are probably going to be neck and neck. It could almost be seen that they are almost at the exact same number there. So that's going to be probably about 45,000 more votes for each of them. Doesn't really matter what you end up looking at here. That I'm actually going to turn off. Chart tilts. There we go. There's the totals. So now we can see the difference here, but that just counts how many they have. So perfect. All right. Now we're going to have to finish off Kings County. He did very, very well here. That's actually not Adams' best county, but that was, in fact, Mamdani's. I believe he is from Brooklyn. So that is going to be a critical piece of information there. He's going to be able to get a lot of votes. There are a lot of votes in Kings County. He's probably not going to be able to get as many as he did, especially with the more competitive field, but with about probably about 5% for Adams. You're going to get quite a few for Cuomo in there. Not many for Sliwa. It's going to be a bit more of performance there. Probably going to be a bit more for Cuomo. 25%. It's probably a bit of an over expectation there, but that's a 58% for Mamdani. So that's going to be a relatively large Marshall, just real quick, I want to figure out how many undecideds there are. 38.2 right here. So that's 38.2. 23.2 for Cuomo. 16.6 for Sliwa. And then 10.6 for Adams. So roughly 11%. So 11% undecided at this point. So that still leaves a lot of variability. So now we're at 262,000 votes for Mamdani. That is enough. He's still leading the first round, but there's still 550,000 votes. That could make or break for either candidate. If Cuomo gets a large enough majority in these two left, he could still win outright in the first round. At this point, I think obviously Adams still can't win at this point. No, it's still anyone's game if they, in theory, win enough. But once you end up going and getting out one of these two, Queens County, you end up having relatively poor performance actually for Adams, for example. Here, he actually did the worst against Sliwa, so most likely Sliwa is going to be doing a bit better here, and Adams is going to be doing relatively poorly even compared to that. But if you look at Mamdani, he got a solid 8-point lead there in the overall count. He did a very strong job there. It was somewhat unexpected he'd win that, but not by very much. So he'd probably end up having basically a close race there with Cuomo. It's probably not going to be by that large of a margin, maybe about 5 points or so. Which means that it's basically just going to be between Cuomo and Mamdani at this point. Adams cannot win the race on the first ballot. Sliwa can't win the race on the first ballot. It's between Cuomo and Mamdani, either of which could still win on the first ballot, but I'd be somewhat surprised if they did. It might be somewhat close, but they probably will not. If we look at Manhattan, it was very, very close. Mamdani ended up winning by 5. But if you look at Manhattan as it happened here, that was actually Eric Adams' largest margin. So he's probably going to do relatively well here. He might be able to actually squeeze out almost 10% of the vote out of Manhattan, depends on how things go. Mamdani and Cuomo are going to be pretty close here, neck and neck, more or less. And then Sliwa is going to do potentially somewhat poorly here. It depends on how much of it was strength for Adams, how much of it was weakness for Sliwa in this area. Mamdani probably being in a horse race here, but did end up coming out on top. And so that would actually mean that you would end up with just narrowly no win for anybody in the first round. But if you ended up having a good enough night for Mamdani, he could end up squeaking out a win here in the first round if he ends up winning. But that's by 12, so it's not going to be anything considerably very, very strong. That's by just under 2 points. He would need 8,000 more votes, which he would easily be able to get from Adams in this situation. Eric Adams voters would probably vote for Mamdani. So this is, as of right now, a somewhat presumptive guess on what might happen for each. You end up with 492,000 votes for Mamdani, 191,000 for Sliwa, 352,000 for Cuomo, 65,000 for Adams. So essentially, that would almost certainly be a Mamdani victory as of right now. Narrow losses in the Bronx, relatively strong in Richmond. That's just because it's very conservative. Mamdani would probably get second, though, because of how he's polling with conservative voters. So now we're pivoting right into the governorship races. So what we're looking at next is going to be the governorships in Virginia and in New Jersey. So obviously, first off, right off the bat, Republicans will still maintain a majority of the governorships across the country come beginning of 2026. There are 26 Republican governorships not up for election all across the country. And so they just generally hold enough that they do not need to win any more in order to hold a majority of them. But Democrats do have a flip opportunity in Virginia, where Glenn Youngkin won against Terry McAuliffe in 2021. However, he cannot run again. Normal Virginia, not West Virginia, is the only state in the country where actually it is in the state constitution that a governor cannot run for consecutive terms. So Youngkin is barred from a consecutive term. McAuliffe was actually a former governor. He was running again. He actually won back in, I believe, probably 2013. Yep, he came back after his mandated weighted term in 2017 when Northam won. And then he lost by 1.9 in 2021 after, and this is very surprising because this is a 12-point shift from the on the nose 12 points from the impressive 10-point margin that Biden won Virginia by in 2020. Then, just 1 year later, we had a Republican win the governorship by 1.9. So, obviously, it's relatively variable, but what are we looking at now in the poll? So, to start things off in Virginia, as we've been talking about, Spanberger's ahead by 6.8. In the polling average coefficient, a Republican pollster actually had her up by 5 with narrowing amounts of undecideds as of right now. But actually, the last time that they had a poll, she was only up by 3. So actually, her margin has been increasing for coefficient. And Roanoke College actually had her up by 17, all the way down to 7. But that's likely mostly due to the decreasing amounts of undecideds as well. So that's going to be the main thing to focus on here. Here's what happened in Virginia. You have Winsome Earle-Sears, who is currently running. She actually outperformed Glenn Youngkin by total vote percentage, not by vote count and not by overall margin either, though. So that's going to be the number one thing. But essentially, they performed almost essentially the exact same. That's very, very close. She did 0.3% worse in margin, though, but they did do good enough in these inner urban regions. Only 65% in Fairfax County for McAuliffe really did him in, and that was really what truthfully allowed Youngkin to end up winning. And Loudoun only won by 11. That's really going to hurt for a Democrat. That's a large Democratic hold area. That's going to be the main thing there. 65%, 65.5% for Ayala versus Sears. So that was the large thing there. Attorney General also went Republican, just narrowly, though, only by 0.8%. So all 3 of those did end up going red. Most likely, they will end up flipping this seat back, though, as currently we have Spanberger, according to Decision Desk HQ, with 46.3% of the vote, Earle-Sears 38.4%. As we can see down here, Signal had her up by 6, and if we look at this one originally only had her up by 3. There's that poll. Only had her up by 3. Now coefficient has her up by 5. So that is quite a bit of an interesting thing there. Roanoke College up by 7. Up by 17. As we said there was a tie down here by coefficient. But then actually had Spanberger up in this more recent one by 3. So that's mainly going to be the current trend is actually that she's doing better and better. This is going to be pushing undecideds right here, and that's why both of their margins went up. This is going to be the Roanoke College poll. So the main thing is that most likely we could end up with a strong Democratic performance. 94-7 in the Kalshi market, only $250,000 put in it, though, so that's going to be the main concern there. But that's going to be, as of right now, we do have a projection of 5.8 points. That's a considerable drop, but still a likely margin, relatively strong for Democrats. That would be a relatively large shift, but less than 2017, which was, of course, the year after the last time that Donald Trump entered office. So potentially both of these are actually going to be worse than the margins that were done 6 years ago, shift to the right in both of them. So that's going to be a potential concern for the Democrats. We're going to have to look into things, especially with how New Jersey's been shifting to the right. But as of right now, it looks like that might not be as big of a concern. Currently, Sherrill is leading by 9. There are only 3 polls that are shown here, though. But Rutgers-Eagleton showed from Sherrill 21 all the way down to Sherrill 10. This is most likely, again, due to much less undecideds. Not necessarily, though. 56 actually seems to be more undecideds, but this is amongst adults. This is amongst likely voters. And so that's definitely going to be the interesting thing here. She's another relatively strong female House candidate. So that's the thing that's tying these two candidates together. The last election, Murphy won by 3.2% against Jack Ciattarelli, the MAGA endorsed Democratic candidate who is nominated again this year, and actually was the first Democratic governor reelected since 1977. So that's really going to be the main thing here. We can see there are actually some potential concerns. Passaic County, which actually flipped to Trump in 2024, did vote blue by about 4 points. You actually had Morris County, which Biden won, actually went for Ciattarelli by 11 points, which is actually relatively shocking. You can see the difference here. Trump won it this time around, but Morris County went for Biden by 4. So that is an interesting thing of note there. It did shift by quite a bit in 1 year as well. It shifted against the Democrats. So that's going to be the main thing to watch, though, is going to be there can only be 3 points of movement, and that's going to be including these already somewhat weak numbers in Hudson County, in Essex County, the only 74% of the vote. You want to have the Democrat be clearly ahead, more than 75% of the vote if possible, especially also in Bergen County, which is actually the second largest, potentially the largest county in the entire state. You want to have more than you want to definitely have more than a 6 point lead in Bergen County. So that is definitely a potential issue for the campaign of Mikey Sherrill here, but she is still definitely leading this market, almost $1 million traded. 88 to 14, which definitely doesn't add up to 100, but probably would be 87 to 13 if we look at the prediction here, actually 9.1 based on the overall slight upward trend, just based off this Rutgers Eagleton poll, was relatively small, 621, only adults. So the margin of error was 5.4 points, which means it could actually end up being as low down as plus 11. And so that actually really isn't much of a change. So it's saying somewhat consistent. Plus, if we look more at the overall, I mean, for example, this right here, he's a very Trump based candidate. He was endorsed by Trump and he's underwater by 15.2. That's not going to change things that much, but also based on low Republican turnout most midterms in this day and age, you probably will end up with a relatively high margin in New Jersey, probably about 9. Again, right here, the prediction being at 9.1 points, which is a 71.5% chance of victory for the Democrats, almost 3 and 4. Virginia, about 60% chance of victory for the Democrats. So, with all that in there, that's going to be 26-24 with a flip in Virginia for the Democrats. And we do also have a victory in New York City for Zohran Mamdani. This is looking like potentially a good November for the Democrats. They would likely win every single race on November 4th. So that's going to be a good election cycle, which is definitely news that they wanted to hear after their very poor performance in 2024. So thank you all so much for watching today's video. Make sure to subscribe down below if you're not already. Follow us on all our platforms and have a fantastic rest of your day.